Welcome to the Born Unbreakable podcast. I'm your host, Coach Des, mindset motivator and lifestyle entrepreneur. From loss, trauma, disappointments, and devastation to healing, hope, and betterment, what has grounded me is my unbreakable spirit. We all have that spirit within us. Every week, I'm here to inspire you with stories of perseverance and growth. My mission is to help you crush self-limiting beliefs and to be unapologetically you. You are your only limit, so take action today. Let your unbreakable ride begin now. This episode is brought to you by Brasserie. More than just bra straps, the accessory I love. With styles from dainty to daring, you will too. Click the link in the description or go to brasserie.com and use promo code BUSHIP to get free shipping on your order today. Welcome to the Born Unbreakable podcast. I am so excited. We have DJ Cardenas in the virtual building because, you know, we're doing this pandemic, this life.
Exactly.
Right?
What's going on?
Right?
How are you?
What's going on? I'm good. My boy DJ. So I do have to tell the story of how DJ and I met. I got to give some props to the East Coast right now. So DJ is from Jersey City, New Jersey. What? And he is representing Charlotte, North Carolina, a couple different parts of the East Coast there. And I was blessed to make the acquaintance of DJ through a common event that we went to a couple years back called the Summit of Greatness. It's this incredible life-changing event that this awesome influencer named Lewis Howes, a lot of you probably follow him on all his different platforms. He was a former American handball player turned lifestyle entrepreneur, has one of the #1 podcasts called The School of Greatness. If you don't listen to it, definitely go check that out. But Lewis has been very inspirational and influential for both DJ and I from a life perspective and also just an entrepreneur and business perspective. And so we had that common thread from that event. DJ and I connected through social media. We started really following each other, and I have been so incredibly impressed with DJ. He is the founder of Weekly Leadership. He is the host of the Weekly Leadership podcast. He's a coach in mindset and growth, and I just had to have him on the show.
Well, listen, I appreciate you having me on, and you know, it's kind of crazy to think that it's already going to be, before you know it, 2 years since we last went to that event.
I know.
Obviously with the big shift in the world. So it's been insane, but I mean, it's great to see everybody still, you know, staying not just busy, but like really growing. I mean, you've had so much growth since then, and all the amazing work that you've been doing. So it's been awesome to see that as well.
Yeah. And it's the community that we've built that you've helped to keep going with great momentum through the Summit of Greatness is awesome, because it was a little disappointing that we couldn't gather over the last 2 years, but there have been some nice virtual events that has been put on both from Lewis and a lot of people in the community. And it's been a nice way for us to connect. You started a little while back on Clubhouse, a weekly forum where many of us get together when we can on Friday afternoons and just keep in touch with what's going on. So if anyone out there is on Clubhouse, right now it is a platform for Apple users, and I'm sure at some point it's going to expand to Android. So the internet's going to break apart when that happens. But yeah, definitely look up DJ. I'll make sure all his info is in the show notes so you can follow him and join his Clubhouse rooms that he puts on. But DJ, you know, I really wanted to have some dialogue with you about leadership. I think that this is such an incredible time to think about how we show up as leaders, given the climate that we're in, both from an economic and political and social perspective. It's kind of incredible to think that in 2021, there's still challenges in our world that we face that seems like they would have been, you know, dismantled long ago, but here we find ourselves still with racial injustice and
Yep.
a lot of political strife, despite all of the advancements that we have in education and technology and things like that. So maybe let's start with, what was your journey to founding Weekly Leadership? What inspired you to create that platform, and maybe talk a little bit more about it for our audience?
Yeah, definitely. So, for me, weekly leadership, it stems from so many different experiences for me. I mean, if I was to really go back, I was actually just thinking about this earlier. Back when I was a kid, I was someone who sat in the back of the class. I used to get bullied. I didn't have a whole lot of friends and things like that. As a matter of fact, I visited my mom up in Jersey, and I was there for the holidays, and I saw my high school proficiency exam. I didn't even realize I failed all three sections of reading, writing, and math. So
Oh
so
my
it's kind
gosh.
of crazy, but it's funny because I think a lot of my passion and my drive for leadership stems from that, and kind of really built the pathway to me wanting to learn, how do I become a leader? How do I become that person that not just stands out, but is someone that can really impact other people? Because that was my thing. Like, I always wanted to do something because I felt that greatness within me. I just didn't know what it was. And so, just to go back a little bit of hindsight, I met a mentor of mine back in 2013, brought me under his wing, showed me everything that he was doing, not just in the event management business, where we were working with, Catherine McPhee and Kristen Chenoweth and the OJs and all these amazing people. But I also started to see what he was doing in terms of building these relationships. We would work with, we'd have Cat Williams come in one night, or Bill Maher, and everybody's just like, oh my God, it's Cat Williams. And oh, look who it is. But, and then I would see somebody else pull up just randomly. And my mentor Joe, he would come up to me and he would say, "Oh yeah, you should meet Bill." I'm like, "Who's Bill?" "Oh, he owns the theater up in Boston." I'm like, "He owns the theater?" "No, yeah, he owns the theater." And I'm like, okay, yeah, let me go find out who this guy is. So it was very interesting to me, because that was like the thing that really pulled me. So how weekly leadership came about was, years down the road, back in 2019 was when it first started. It was just a little weekly video that I did on Instagram that was once a week, 2-3 minutes long, of just me giving advice or sharing stories on leadership. And I kind of just kept that same thing of trying to create a resource for others like me who were trying to figure out, well, what real leadership is. And I knew there was something that I was doing in my corporate career that many others weren't. And so that's how the weekly leadership thing came to be. And it kind of just kept, snowballing. And now here we are in 2021. We have the website, the podcast, articles, and then we'll have contributing authors as we go along. And I'm also working on releasing a book that focuses on 5 principles for me of what I think real leadership is about, and 5 principles that anybody can take and really just implement. So that's pretty much where we've been with everything, and just a little bit of a story of how we started weekly leadership.
Oh my gosh, you are so boss, DJ. That is amazing. Because, well, as I mentioned, as I started digging into your content, it is freaking awesome. I
Thank
think
you.
it's so inspirational, and it comes at such, as I mentioned earlier, an opportune time for us to really examine and explore what leadership means, not just externally, because I think oftentimes we think leader, we think public figures, we think you have to have a particular title to be a quote unquote leader, when really the way that we should be framing it is how we're showing up in our communities, that we can impact on a daily basis all the time.
Right. Right. Yeah,
So,
that's one of the things I think when I first realized where there was a separation in what I was doing and what leaders in the company that I was working at were doing. And, I was in the event management field, eventually started scaling from there and ended up in business consulting with the same company. And I moved on from my career in that space from that time. But I remember just being in the event management position. I had a team of 3 people that I worked with, and then we had another manager. And I remember all these different teams that we would lead. We would do about 270, 280 plus events a year. And
mhm.
there were so many times where I would see individuals who would literally we would hire them for the event and they would come look for me, or they would say, "Hey, where's DJ working? Oh, is he working in Atlantic City today? All right, I want to go there because that's where he's at." So I knew there was something there. And then I would go see the vice president and the executives and all these different directors. And there were people who would walk into a room and literally turn around and walk out because they didn't want to be around them. So I'm like, wait, what am I? So obviously it's not the positional level. It's not the
Mhm.
title. I mean, I know that, and I think most people do, but what are the real core principles? And that's what really inspired me to say, let me study myself even more and let me really dive deep into the work that I've been doing to see what the separation is and how I can relay that information to other people. And that's, that's the most important thing.
Yeah. What are those principles for you as you've examined them more closely?
So, there's a ton of different things, but I really boiled it down to what I call the 5 keys of impact leadership. That's communication, collaboration, consistency, courage, and care. And when you look at those 5 areas of leadership, those are really basic points, but those are some of the most important factors that are left out and oftentimes forgotten as we start to scale our careers, our businesses, or really our communities. You could just be somebody who's leading a nonprofit in your local community. And sometimes those things are forgotten. And a lot of them really stem from just principles that people have been implementing for years. But as we start to get into these new waves of technology, different businesses are opening. I mean, just 2020 alone, with the shift that happened with COVID happening, that changed the game plan for a lot of people. So every single year, every single moment, every single chapter of our life, we're always going through a new wave of something that is causing us to have to really reevaluate what we're doing. But there's always a baseline that we can go back to, a guiding set of principles. And the best way I could really break it down is I have a certification in Six Sigma. And when I went after that, it was really because of the passion of coming up with different systems and processes, which is exactly what Six Sigma is. So when I saw that, I was like, oh, this is great. And then I started to think, well, how come we don't have that in leadership? How come there's no one set of rules? Like if you go to a business, like especially in manufacturing, they'll have a Six Sigma principle of this is how we do, the process. This is how we have things done on the floor. Then we go from the floor to the corporate, and then we go from corporate to the sales. And there's a process. In leadership, there's a bunch of different set of principles, but there's no set baseline as to, okay, here's 5, 6, 7 principles that we can go back to and just implement them in a way that people understand them. They can use them as a guideline, and then use them as a way to recenter themselves and their teams when they feel like they're going off track. Because sometimes when you go off track, that's when things get haywire, especially when you have all these external forces changing things in your business. You got to be able to say, okay, well, where can I go back to that's going to help me get, okay, let me go back to communication. Maybe I need to communicate more. Let me go back to collaboration. Maybe I need to collaborate more. I'm not in the office with the team as often as I should be. I've been spending too much outside. Let me go back, or whatever the case may be. It gives you that guiding point. And so those were the 5, and like I said, I call them the 5 keys of impact leadership. There's a ton of different ones out there, but those are the 5 things that I truly believe are the most valuable and the most important when it comes to not only starting out, but having that guiding point.
Yeah. It's amazing that brought up systems because that you're totally right. When we look at something like manufacturing and Toyota,
Mhm.
they are the leader in lean processes. And oftentimes people
Yes.
will fly all the way over there to study how they do that process to implement it within their own business. In
Right.
my consulting world, in the healthcare realm, Six Sigma is a huge baseline for how people understand what good or standard looks like. So I'm totally tracking with you on that. Um,
Yep.
these principles that you mentioned, these 5 impact principles, are awesome, and they definitely resonate with me. What have you seen of these principles that is the most challenging when you encounter different conversations or connecting with different leaders that have maybe requires a little bit more focus and attention?
I think, for me, and the reason why I made it number one is always going to be communication. That's the biggest thing. And I oftentimes, from all levels, whether you're someone who's just starting out in your career or you're someone who's been in the game 30, 40, 50 years, communication has always been the biggest thing. And the reason why is because it's not only the first step, but it's the step that opens up the lines, right? Right now, today, we would not be having this podcast if we didn't open the lines of communication, right? Like
Hmm.
if I was shying away or if I wasn't as transparent or honest or thorough with my work and I did not open up that line of communication, we would not be in contact with each other and we wouldn't be doing this podcast. And so many other things that has happened with other people, me starting weekly leadership. So communication is always going to be the biggest thing. And it's the most important step that really stays consistent throughout the process as you start to move into collaboration, consistency. You have to do all these things, but they start with communication. They all go back to that. I can't be consistent if I'm not communicating. I can't collaborate if I'm not communicating. How am I supposed to have courage and care for others if I'm not communicating? So it always goes back to that for me. And I think there's so many individuals who struggle with it for a couple of reasons. One being the fact that nobody's showed them. And then two, oftentimes we get into environments where it's just kind of like, it is what it is. So we never really focus on it. And you kind of just take shape of whatever environment you're in. Like that becomes your norm. If you work at a company that has really bad communication skills with their sales teams, you can't expect people to go out and make sales and not be able to connect with the community and the prospects that they have. But if you
Hmm.
build a team where you're training people and you're opening those lines, then you can do that. And that's always
Yep.
going to be, again, the first step that gets you to grow. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the biggest thing.
It's the foundational part. It's like a house. If you don't have the foundation,
Exactly.
you can't get all the other components, right? You can't put on a roof and build walls
Exactly.
until you have that base. Yeah, I love that. I love that so much. One of the things that I think about is how do you stay inspired as a leader? Like what does it look like for you to lead by example? Because leaders too have struggles and they have down times and they get discouraged. What would you say as leaders we can do to stay inspired in a very noisy, distracting environment?
Well, the first thing that I always look at is carving out time for yourself, right? I mean, that's going to be the biggest thing. And not just to say, people will say, hey, self-care and whatever. Yeah, you got to do those things, right? Go and relax, go take a spa day, whatever it is you want to do, go do that. But then also carve out some time for you to read. Carve out some time for you to maybe there's a documentary on some research that you've always been interested in. All right, relax and go watch that documentary. Some of the biggest things that come to mind when we're looking at staying motivated is building a community around yourself. Maybe four, five, six different people that you all have the same mindset or similar growth. And you can go to them, you can talk to them. Maybe it's on Clubhouse or maybe you do a podcast together. Oftentimes I'll reach out to people and, hey, what do you think about this idea? And we'll collaborate and we'll talk about it. And it doesn't have to be something that we're doing, tomorrow, but it's just that conversation. Again, going back to opening the lines of communication that keeps you motivated, because there's been times where I would get done with a crazy day with work and all these other things going on. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh yeah, I got to jump on Clubhouse. We got a room to do tonight. And then I jump in the room and all of a sudden this energy comes in because of the individuals that are there with me.
Yeah.
So it's really just about surrounding yourself with the right people. I remember we did SOG a couple weeks ago and Lewis House came into the room and, it's a Friday night for us. And, you're ready to like, all right, cool, Friday, we'll do our room. And then the room blows up and all of a sudden there's 200 people there, but the energy level goes through the roof. So you're constantly getting inspired. And I think also realizing, again, there's always another chapter, there's always another obstacle, another wave. I always think about what Jim Rohn said, that every single part of life is like the seasons, right? You always have the winter, spring, summer, and fall. So there's always going to be another winter. There's always going to be another spring, and we know this. And they may be different from the ones previously, but it's just a matter of knowing that it's there, that you're going to be able to go over through that obstacle. and just having the right people is how you prepare for those winters. This is how you prepare for those springs that keeps you motivated, that keeps you ready in order to overcome them when they get there. So that's how I would do it and how I would break it down.
Yeah. I love that. And I love what you said about community and taking time to learn. What I took away from what you just described is a mindset of curiosity and learning. If we're open
Hmm.
to reading, listening to podcasts, watching documentaries, it allows us to take in new information. So um, it kind of makes me think about how we have a choice of what we consume. And there are negative things that we can consume
Hmm.
because there's no shortage of that. All you have to do is turn on the TV or turn on any kind of media platform, and it'll wash over you. And
It
so
will,
it's making me feel like what you're talking about is the intentionality of making time to choose things that are feeding you in a way that can elevate your mind and not destroy it with garbage.
of course. Yeah. Yeah. You know, the biggest thing too, it's so funny, kind of pointing back to Jim Rohn. Anybody that knows me knows like Jim Rohn is one of my favorite speakers here. And if you guys don't know Jim Rohn, you probably know Tony Robbins. Tony used to work for Jim back in the day, right? So that's, you can see where that source of inspiration came from and what it led to. But, you know, Jim Rohn used to always talk about that. You know, if you wake up in the morning, you know, this is back in the 70s and 80s. You wake up in the morning and you start watching the news, or you read the newspaper and you start reading about murders and stabbings and debt and people losing their businesses and all these different things. And this store got broken into and this bank lost its money. And you can't expect to go out and have a great day, right? Now you can shift it, and you could do that in the decisions that you make later on throughout the day as you start to move forward. But you have to, as he would say, stand guard at the gate of your mind. You have to be able to say, okay, this is what I'm going to watch. This is what I'm going to listen to. This is who I'm going to surround myself with. This is the career, the path, the business, the individuals I want to have in my life. That is what I'm moving towards, not be on the surface level of like, oh, well, it is what it is, right? I did an interview with Clint Pulver, who has a book coming out later in a couple weeks, actually. And he said, we need to stop walking around with this wandering generality of just like, oh, well, it is what it is. And wouldn't it be cool if we can just do that and really just start taking claim of our life and where we are and saying, no, I'm making a decision today to do XYZ and go out in there and do it. Whether it's jumping into a random room on Clubhouse, maybe it's just going to a bookstore, or maybe you just go on a random vacation. Carrie Kish, we just mentioned him earlier. Carrie, a good friend of ours, flew to the Summit of Greatness by himself, just flew to it by himself. I mean, I flew there by myself and like many others, but we left with, you know, all of these relationships that we built that were just like people. It was like we knew each other for 10 years. And here we are, you know, 2 years into it. You know, hopefully by next year things will open up a little bit. But, you know, it'll be already 3 years at that point, and it's almost like we've known each other this lifetime. And that comes
Yeah.
with surrounding yourself with the right people. So
Yeah.
that's again the most important thing.
That is so huge. It's funny because Carrie and I were talking about that the other day. And sometimes you have to take stock of the people around you. And if they're not aligning with the goals or the place that you want to be, you have to choose to put yourself in environments that are going to expand the folks around you. And I think that Summit of Greatness and this community has given us the incredible opportunity and has been a gift that's kept on giving in terms of networks and collaborations that have been a lot of fun despite being in this interesting environment of um, the coronavirus.
Right.
you
The
know,
pandemic. Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
that thing that we thought was gonna, go away after a couple weeks. We're here more than a year later. You know what I mean? So it's
It's insane. It's
it's
insane.
insane.
It's been so crazy, but I think what it did is it forced a lot of people to really see what was important in their life and what wasn't. like without a doubt, we lost a lot. We
Yeah.
lost a lot. I know I had a roller coaster of a year. I'm sure you did, and many others had, a lot of ups and downs. And there were some wins along the way. I'm not like I did have some wins along the way, but there was also a lot of loss, and there were people who lost even more. There were people who lost family members, people who lost their careers, people who lost their, businesses that are still impacted from that to this day and probably will be from, who knows how long. But, it's one of those things that I think about and I'm like, you know what? I'm in a way happy that it happened because I was able to really evaluate, the things that were really important and really focus and hone in on the things that I was doing as well. So that's for me the positive side of it. Even though, we had to stay inside and we're still wearing masks and everything. So
I know.
it is what it is.
Masks are now an accessory that we have a part of our wardrobe.
Hmm.
So I cannot get around the fact that it's 2021
Right.
and we've got a lot of chaos still happening in our first world country, and
Right.
in many ways it was an interesting process for me because 2020 at the beginning of the year, I was so gung ho. I went to the Oprah event. I was like, girl, yes, this is 2020 vision, clarity, all the things, leadership. And I was on a high. Then the coronavirus hit, and I was like, oh my gosh. And then our political climate just got more crazy, and George Floyd, and all these things were happening. And I was sitting there going, am I in the twilight zone? Like, what is happening? This can't be 2020 vision. And then I thought to myself, you know what? It is. It's just what you don't want to see. And so it got
Mm,
me thinking, um, coming back around to leadership, is that personal reflection as an individual is how do you show up in a time when it feels like the entire world, especially the immediate world that we live in here in America, is just, in some ways feels like it is deteriorating a little bit around you. What
mm.
has been your perspective of how to stay in a mindset that is flourishing, given the climate that we're in from a social perspective?
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt, aside from COVID-19, politically and socially, we've gone through, I mean, just a crazy year. And I love what you said there about 2020. And that was the theme of the year, right? Like everybody went into 2020, like, yes, 2020 vision, like, yeah, let's go, let's get it. But like you said, we received a sense of clarity that we weren't, I don't want to say we weren't expecting, but that we needed to see. And I think we saw that. We saw a lot of truths. We saw a lot of things, especially with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and many others. Ahmaud Arbery, I believe, who we lost in February of that year. So it was right before, I think, right around the same time or right before George Floyd. So it's very, yeah, it was upsetting, obviously, and very sad and unfortunate, I think, for the world to see all of that, especially, and then obviously we go through this roller coaster of politics, and it's up and down. But how do you keep a mindset that's flourishing? I mean, it's not easy, but again, I think it's about finding the people that are doing right things and aligning yourself with those people. And a lot of times I go back to this analogy that I use, that a lot of times the relationships that we build in life are like two trains leaving from a train station, right? So you're on the West Coast, correct?
Yep, California, the Bay Area.
Right. Okay, perfect. So let's say I'm in North Carolina. Let's say I take a train here and there's two trains, one going to Cali, one going to Vermont, right? If I want to get to Cali, at some point, even though we leave from the same train station, I have to stay on the track. Those trains have to separate. One has to go west, the other one has to go north. Now, the trip to Cali might be a little bit longer, but there's going to be moments, experiences, and things that will happen along the way that eventually when I get there, it's going to be even more worth it. That although there's these obstacles and although the trip is longer and you're going to meet the people along the way that get you there. So it's difficult, but aligning myself with those people eventually will help us get to that final destination. Where most people in life, we go through this surface level stuff, right? Where we say, you know what? I wasn't really planning on going to Vermont, but it's a shorter ride and it's a lot quicker. Yeah, I might as well. That's where everybody else is going. So I'm going to go to Vermont too, right? And we do the same thing in life. Well, that's where everybody else is doing. Oh, they said that that's what we do. Okay, yeah, I'll do that too. And we go there and we pretend like it's okay, but it's really not. And we kind of just kick it under the rug and we live with this pressure that we're constantly keeping on our shoulders of not doing the things that we're totally aligned with. And that's because we let all these outside factors in. So, I think, aligning yourself with the right people can help you through those difficult times, especially one like 2020, whether it's socially, politically, personally, maybe it's just business. I think it's just having the right people in your life because, like I said, you're going to lose a lot along the way. The ride is going to be a little bit longer, but eventually, guess what? You end up in Cali. Eventually, you end in that final destination to where you were planning and where you feel most aligned with, and where you find that purpose. But it's not easy. I think it's just a matter of, like you said earlier, expanding past your horizons and just putting yourself out there. And I find that the more that you share your story, the more people that you find that resonate with that story, even if you don't think that it's something that people would find, interesting. Right. I mean, like, I look at my stuff, but when I share my story, there's a lot of kids out there who grew up and a lot of people today who struggle with, whatever they're doing because they grew up like me. Right. They weren't good in school. They failed a lot. They never had the right people around them, and they might hear me speak on stage one day on Clubhouse or something like that, and I say, oh wow, like that's the same thing I went through too. Oh, let me go reach out to DJ. Or they might hear your story and they say, oh wow, Des did that too. Oh, there's somebody else out there that experienced the same thing, and look, she's thriving. She was able to get past it. Let me go align myself with her. As we go down the track, we pick up the moments and experiences along the way where we find people that are like, oh, let me help you and you help them, right? It's vice versa. And so again, there might be some obstacles along the way throughout that journey, but again, it just really comes down to the people that are around you. And I think that's the best way. And you saw with everything that happened politically and everything that's happened socially, with the loss of all these people and all these different things, it was the bonding and the connectivity of people coming together that
Mhm.
said, hey, even though we have all these things going on, it's us coming together that's going to make the difference. And
Yeah.
essentially, we're not going to forget, obviously, all the stuff that happened, but it's just a matter of bonding together to create a different outcome so we can move forward from it. And that's the
Yeah.
best way to do it, I believe.
Yeah. Oh, that's so inspiring. I think that the momentum that you gain based on what you described, it's like you're like the train, and that journey becomes more exponential because you're getting magnetized with more things coming into your orbit that's allowing you to thrive because you're open to the journey.
Yep.
And I think that one of the things that I often, when I'm coaching people and I hear stories, um, at the beginning, going back to what you said about sharing your stories, it's this scary feeling of vulnerability
Mm.
that people have, that go, oh my gosh, if I say this, I'm going to feel like I'm getting judged. It's scary. What if people don't understand me?
Yep.
What if people, I think just sharing something personal is always a little unsettling because you're not sure how it's going to land for people. And then what I've found is 100% of the time, I would say, they're surprised by how much that positively impacts somebody else who felt like they were alone because they just needed to hear a story.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that. I was thinking of this trailer that I just saw of Tina Turner, which, I mean, the documentary looks awesome. It's on HBO right now. And the crazy thing about the documentary, if you watch the trailer, they talk about, how she started out and she was this powerhouse and she had this amazing voice at a young age. And then she had that dark period in her relationship with Ike Turner. It wasn't until she had left that relationship and she decided that she was going to like rebrand herself. Like, even though she lost everything, she had basically no money, was starting from scratch again, but she had her story in her name. And that was the whole trailer of that documentary, was how she went out. And it was her story, aside from, her talent and her amazing, singing. It was her story that impacted people more, that created the legend of Tina Turner. Who would have thought that the darkest period of her life was the period that shined light on all the different areas where people were struggling, and ended up impacting the world? So, yeah, I think that's, for me, I mean, vulnerability, you hit it right on the head, is the most important thing when it comes to leadership and authenticity. Because a lot of leaders, again, they put up this wall. When I was working at this company in Jersey, right? And where I had started in the event management industry. And, as I started to move up and I was working with all these individuals, I remember working with, the vice president and the COO and all these people hand in hand. And there was this wall. There was this, okay, this is what I do, this is my title, and that's all you need to know. There was no connectivity. There was no communication. There was no transparency. So you might know from hearing from other people, like, oh yeah, I think so and so does this, and that. Like, you don't even know what they do. You just know that, okay, that's the president, that's the director, and then that's what it is, and what they say goes. And if you questioned it, it was not good. It was not good. If you questioned their motive or why they had everybody do a certain thing, it was like, oh, we're having a meeting. We used to go into meetings where managers would tell people, don't ask questions about X, Y, and Z, because they don't want to hear it. You got to sit there and just listen. And I was like, well, then it's not a meeting. This is a lecture, because because now they're just telling us what they want to do. And I think the thing there to also know is not being afraid to be challenged, right? Because a lot of times, like, as leaders, again, you get to that positional level and there's this idea that you're supposed to know everything. But guess what? You don't, I don't, nobody does. The best of the best don't even know everything. It's impossible, right? But if you're transparent and you're honest and you're vulnerable and you say, hey, you know what? I don't know exactly what the right step is, but I do know that if we work together, if we open up those lines of communication, then we can get to a point where we'll figure it out together. And putting the right people around you, again, going back to building that sense of community, will help you get there. Yeah, just like on Thursday, I had my weekly leadership room, but because of everything else going on, I couldn't host it. Carrie reached out and said, hey, if you want, me and Kathy will host it for you. And they hosted the room. And, extremely appreciative of that. But it was because I aligned myself with the right people that have the same mission and vision as I do, that they're like, hey, we believe in the work that you're doing, and vice versa. We don't mind running this room for you, and continuing that path of growth and impact. So but yeah, it really just comes down to the sense of vulnerability and not being afraid to share your story. I mean, that's your greatest power, is the story you have, no matter how silly you think it is, no matter, how uninteresting you think it is. There's probably more people than you know that have went through the same thing or worse, and they find inspiration in that story. So I tell people all the time, share your story, get on a podcast or write it, whatever that medium is that you use to get it out there. Do it, because you're going to find a lot of impact, and you're going to grow your circle outside of that as well.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So powerful. And it's such an alignment, DJ. One of my biggest messages is to be unapologetically you. And
Mm,
part of that, being able to do that, is owning your story, because it is who you are, and it continues to shape the choices that you make, the people you surround yourself with, and how you choose to accelerate the different goals and dreams in your life. So
mhm.
thank you so much for saying that. I want to ask you a couple questions
Yeah.
that will allow people to get to know a little bit more about you, and hopefully encourage them to, maybe dig in a little bit more into themselves. So my first question for you is, what 3 words best describe you?
Mm, I would definitely say passionate. I would say grateful. And for my third word, I would say adventurous. And for me, it's really just the adventure of building and growing, having new experiences as, the kid who was once in the back of the class, growing up in Jersey City, New Jersey, and, never really thought that I would be, in these different moments and experiences. For me, that's the adventure of life. It's really just being able to see myself in those moments and just being grateful and passionate and saying, wow, I can't believe that I'm actually here. So those would be my three.
I love that adventure. That's amazing. Okay, my next question for you is what's something about yourself that you're working on improving?
Ooh, for me, it's always my public speaking because I'm constantly doing, live rooms. I'm constantly, on the virtual stages, if you will, hosting a lot of stuff. So even though I've been on a lot of podcasts, I've done a lot of different things, I'm always looking to improve that because I want to try to show up as best as I can each time. And every single time I'm always speaking to a different group. Every single time we do a room in weekly leadership, it's a different topic, or I might be collaborating with someone else. So my public speaking is my biggest thing. I have this natural tendency to be able to do it. It really kind of just comes, second nature for me. But I'm always trying to look at how I can improve in that space along with my writing because a lot of my work involves speaking and writing. So that's really my two. If I had to give you two, those would be my ones, my two ones that I focus on.
I love that you go from the quiet kid that doesn't write and read much to this vibrant person that writes, speaks, and reads all day long.
That's that's it. And the funniest thing about it is that I remember seeing that high school proficiency exam, and I remember thinking back okay, I did all right. I think I did all right. And then I looked at and I went to the basement. We were looking at old, photos from when me and my sister were kids. And I'm like, what's this folded up piece of paper? I open it up and it's the same exam. And I look at all three scores and I failed reading, writing, and math. So who passed me? Who told me I was good to go to high school? So, but it's just funny because now my whole life now is surrounded by speaking and writing. Obviously, like when I got my master's in management and leadership, that was my whole thing. And it was funny because I became one of the fastest people to finish that program, not because I was trying to speed through it or because I was trying to beat anyone. I mean, I did the whole program myself. Right? There was nobody to compete against. I mean, but it was because of the years of experiences that I've had that when I saw the work, I was able to fully immerse myself. And they were like, "Oh, hey, do you want to take 3 weeks off?" Because they would try to scale it out like a regular program. It was supposed to be like a year and a half, 2 years.
Yeah.
And they were like, "Do you want to take? You finished your first classes. You could take 2, 3 weeks off." I was like, "Oh, um, okay." I was like, "Can you bump up the other ones, or am I allowed to move forward?" They're like, "If you want, it's just not really recommended." I'm like, yeah, just bump it up, bump it up. And then all of a sudden I was on the advanced track. So it's just funny to think of myself as the kid who wasn't really that great in class academically, and to now be in a place where it's a totally different story. But that just comes with the fact that I aligned myself with work that makes sense. It's work
Yep.
that I feel that I'm gifted in. So that's really why I've been able to move along at such a pace and do it in a way where I've been able to thrive in it. It's because I'm not a math major, but I know management and leadership. So that's really why.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I love that you gave yourself grace. You were like, "Yeah, no, I was probably decent." Or not,
Yeah.
but it just
Yeah.
it shows us that when we put our mind to something, you can persevere, right? So, here you are.
100%. Of course. Exactly. Exactly.
Okay. My next question for you is what's a self-limiting belief that you've had to overcome?
Ooh, that's a good one. Um, I think a lot of it really came to for me on a personal level was physical. When I was younger, I was always like the bigger kid in class, right? And I had mentioned, whatever, I used to get bullied and stuff like that. And which I'm happy that happened because it gave me the fuel to turn that around. When I first got to college, I was always on this path of just, I was eating and whatever. And then you get to college, it's even worse. You're eating ramen and pizza and whatever. So by the time I got to college, I was 320. And a lot of it came from the self-limiting belief that I could never go to the gym or I just wasn't, strong enough or whatever. And then I ended up going and doing that and became obsessed with fitness. And then that led to me, not only losing all that weight and, I got down to like 205 and then I got really heavily into like weightlifting. Now I'm like reverting and going back to it because of COVID. So I haven't been able to like hit the gym how I would normally, but that led into a bunch of different things, and I ended up getting into jujitsu and competing in that and things of that nature. So I think that was my previously like my biggest self-limiting belief, that is that I couldn't get there. But I think through just consistent action, eventually I did, and I was able to figure out what worked, what didn't, and really for me changed my life at that point.
That's incredible. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think so many people can relate to that. You know, you kind of just tell yourself something and you live into an identity that you've created in your mind
Yep.
of
Yep.
I'm that person, and you don't realize that you're feeding it yourself, you know?
Yep. And I'm gonna say this, and do you still do Zumba?
Boy, you know I do. Hey.
All right, so I'm gonna tell a quick story. When I first got into like fitness and everything, I was in college. I went to school in Rhode Island, so uh, you know, I was going to Johnson and Wales University, and I was there for my undergraduate. And when I started going to the gym, I was going to the other side of the campus where the basketball team and the baseball team would train, because there's this huge gym, treadmills, every single machine you could think of. Then I went home, and we didn't have that at home. We had like where my mom lives, they have a clubhouse that has a nice sized gym in there, but that was about it. So then when I came back home, there was nothing there except for a Zumba DVD set.
Stop.
Yep.
It's my dream come true.
Yep. And I got in, and it's funny too because I still remember. So there's somebody who had like uploaded the video like 8 or 9 years ago of the Zumba cardio party, and I still remember every single step. Like you throw on the song, I'm doing cumbia, I'm doing salsa, and I know all the. I'm like, hey, like I
Hey.
know all the different steps, and but that was like one of my main ways of like kind just trying to stay in shape, and I literally like I know the whole Zumba thing like the back of my hand, so it's pretty funny story for.
DJ, our connection level just got so deep right now. Um, I'm like, I'm telling you sometimes I be feeling myself. I be like
The
getting it just by
Zumba.
myself. Hey,
Yeah, I
nobody's
know.
there but me, but I'm getting it right now. You just wait till we could do this in public. Oh,
Exactly.
snap. Yeah, but
Exactly.
it's so much fun. It's just like it's exercise, but I'm not even really thinking about it, because it's a good time. So
It is. It is. I love it. I do.
So, I love that. I love that so much. All right. My next question for you is, what's one thing that you want to see changed in the world?
I want people to really tap into that inner greatness that they have, right? And I think for me as a kid, and for years really, I always felt like I had this great thing in me. I just didn't know what it was. And it wasn't until I hit some sort of adversity that I figured out, like, oh, I know what leadership is. I know what personal development is. Like, no wonder why I've had these experiences. Like, I wasn't like some like multi-millionaire or whatever, like, and I'll leave that for Instagram and social media. That's fine. Of course, we all want to have success, and we want to grow and create things. But I think what's most important is how we grow ourselves internally so we can perform at a higher level externally, right? Um, I just wrote an article that I sent to this company on intrinsic and extrinsic motivations. where your intrinsic ones are obviously your inside motivations, what really drives you, your purpose, your mission, your goals in life, and your extrinsic ones are, the money or what people tell you is what you should do and all these different things. And if we just tap into our intrinsic motivations more often, we'll not only become even more aligned, but we'll also find the thing that we're gifted at. And that is where you start to grow, and then everything else will follow. I love the story of Marie Callender, the pie company,
Yeah.
who, and I think Steve Harvey talked about this too, where she was working at some diner that was getting ready to go out of business. She was making, whatever minimum wage. And the diner all of a sudden was going to close. And she's like, you know what? I'm going to bring some pie. And the owner's like, okay, sure, bring some pie. It sells out. She brings 2 pies. She brings 3 pies. They sell out. 4, 5, it keeps selling out. So then she was starting making so much money from the pies that she brought a commercial oven to put in her house. And now, if you look at where Marie Callender is today, you can't go anywhere in the world without seeing Marie Callender's pies, right? Go to
Mhm.
the frozen section of your local Target, you're going to see Marie Callender's pies. So she tapped into her gift, where something as simple as making pie, you wouldn't think of that as like, oh, I'm going to build a business out of this, or I'm going to, create something great out of this. But it's aligning yourself and finding out what those intrinsic motivations are that'll allow you to figure out what you're great at, but most importantly, what you're gifted at. And that's what I want people to tap into. Because if you figure out what you're gifted at, then everything else kind of just happens naturally. You don't have to worry about, oh, what am I going to do and how am I going to grow? And just tap into that. And then you'll be able to scale and motivate and impact, and then really get to an area of life where you can really truly be happy and not be obsessed with what the media is telling you is successful or how you should measure your success. Just try to tap into your gift. That's what I would want everyone to do.
Wow. There is so much magic in what you just said, and how when we go inward, everything happens outward, but it starts inside. It
Mm,
starts with the exploration, the journey, the time, the commitment that we spend on ourselves, and not all this stuff on the outside.
yeah, exactly. It's the most important thing, and how we can pull away from the aspect where we keep constantly putting weight into what others think about us and say, and what they think we should do and all these different things. And I can tell you right now, that is the most stressful thing. I mean, I grew up my whole life like that. Like, as a kid, like, I used to worry what other people would say, what they would think. I should have just been tapping into what makes me happy, but nobody was there to tell me that, right? And I didn't know that. It's the trial and error process that makes you say, okay, where can I really go with this? How can I scale? And again, it really just comes down to putting yourself out there. Maybe you got to take a trip by yourself somewhere. I remember my mom when I was younger, not to go off track, but we took a trip back in the day. It was just me, my mom, and my sister to Costa Rica. This is back before Costa Rica is like before what it is today. Like now, I mean, still a
Mhm.
beautiful country, but now it's a very popular travel destination. It wasn't that at the
Yeah.
time. It
Yeah.
was it was political strife. I mean, there were some beautiful areas that we went to. I remember we were in Tortuguero and we went to Tamarindo and all these beautiful places. And we were there for a month. And I'm like, what in the world? Because I was like, can we go to Disney World or something? Like, what is this? And
What is this? A jungle?
and I'm like, yeah. Yeah, we were literally, and then I remember I'm thinking about, like, wow, like, I remember being like 12 years old, and we were climbing through the rainforest. I went on a hike and we were climbing through the rainforest, and you would see like poisonous frogs that were like bright yellow, and then we get to the top of this mountain and you see the canal, and it was just like, so it was pretty crazy, and I realized that at the time, but when I look back, it was those type of experiences, and I realized what she was doing, which was just trying to get us to tap into expanding our horizons. Because she used to always say that, right? I mean, we grew up in Jersey City, urban area. We didn't really have a whole lot growing up. And my mom's done so well for herself in her medical career. But in the beginning, it wasn't like that. So to see that at an early point where it wasn't about trying to take the job that gives you the most money. And it wasn't about trying to get the title. It was about expanding yourself, because that's where you really learn and grow. And then everything else follows after that. So that
Yeah.
was like the most important thing for me. Yeah, like I'll never forget that for sure.
That is so powerful. Yeah, it reminds me. I did Tony Robbins Unleash the Power Within,
Oof.
and
BW.
yeah, and he was talking about fulfillment. And as he talked about that, he was bringing up people like Anthony Bourdain, Kate Spade, Robin Williams, and it's incredible when we think about these people that have been icons in our society doing things that will live on and create a legacy for forever. Yet, fulfillment, you would think, my gosh, these people had everything. What, and yet their lives were shortened because they weren't fulfilled in the ways that you're talking about
Hmm.
in terms of taking the time to go in. And yeah, that was kind of an eye-opening thing for me to think of, because I
Hmm.
sat there and thought, oh yeah, gosh, I people would want that life, want those, the amazing success and the money and the travel and the experience and the celebrityhood. But that's not everything.
No.
So,
No,
yeah.
and that's why you see more people start. You see so many people that struggle with drug addictions and alcohol addictions and things like that. And there's a multitude of different reasons, but a lot of it comes from the fact that we just we didn't tap into those things that really truly made us happy. And we were
Yeah.
so busy putting weight into what other people were thinking and doing and things like that, trying to make other people happy or whatever the case may be, when really you should be checking in with yourself first. And I think again, it just comes down to having the people around you that tell you that, like, hey, you should really tap into these skills or these gifts that you have, because that's where you start to find that growth and fulfillment. So, if people do that, then we start to kind of pull away from all those negative aspects, and then you can really truly, live a happier and fulfilled life. So
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, my last question before we start to wrap up is, what is one of the best pieces of advice that you've ever been given?
the best piece of advice I ever got was from my mentor, Joe Rocco. And I mentioned him earlier. So, and I just want to give people a little context. So, Joe was a sports analyst back in the 70s and 80s. And he's worked with, everybody. He's interviewed Muhammad Ali, George Foreman, Howard Cosell, Billie Jean King. I mean, the who's who of sports. He's worked with them. And eventually he became an entrepreneur, and he started off doing live events in comedy, which was how I met him, because I love stand up comedy. I'm a big fan of so many different people. So that's how I started working with all these comedians, and I was at the time 20 years old, and I'm here with the Impractical Jokers and Lily Tomlin and all these amazing individuals. And so I remember when I first met him, we did the Impractical Jokers was the first show, and I knew them for years. This is before they even had their TV show. They were like a little YouTube group that I used to watch back in the day, and we were working with them. And I remember we were setting up their stuff in the back, and he actually, when he saw me working, he would have me personally work with every single performer, which is how I kind of became like his go-to guy. So I would work with the performers, their managers, and make sure they had everything. So I'm, here I am in a trailer, like hanging out with Bill Burr and all these people. But I remember the first show, we were setting everything up, and we were walking from the back, or technically the front, where the stage was, all the way back to where our hub was, where everybody was sitting. It was like, DJ, if there's anything that you take away from this, he's like, the first thing that you should always know is you should never assume. And at that moment, he was really talking about where we had partnerships with other businesses to supply, like, guitar stands or seating, if we had to get seating for the performer. And in return, we would always put their name out there or we would order food from them or whatever the case may be. Um, and we had to go check on something. He said you should just never assume that they're going to come through and they'll have everything that you need. Always double check, double down on yourself, and if they don't get it, at least you know that you were able to execute it. So if they fall through, you know that you were able to deliver. And I think that's an important thing to take away, that we should never assume that, there's always going to be somebody that's going to help us. We should never assume that, our boss or our manager or whoever's there is going to give us the opportunity to grow, no matter how many years you've been there. We should never assume, because we keep putting our fate and our destiny in the hands of other individuals who may not necessarily care or may not necessarily come through when you have a project or something you want to do. Eventually, you'll find people that you can build and trust, and you'll have that community with that are going to help you with that. But I think at the end of the day, if you just invest and bank on yourself, then you won't have to worry about assuming. You can always know for sure what the case is going to be. Like, right now, if you started the alphabet, that you could get from A to Z if you were to go all the way through. But if you stopped halfway assuming that I was going to finish the rest of it, there's no telling that I'm going to finish the rest of it.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I'm saying? So if you're able to just bank on yourself and just like, no, I'm going to finish this. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to make sure it happens. That's where you start to really have a better execution point. So
Yeah.
that, I would say, if anything, was one of the most important ones for sure.
Wow. I love that. And what's so awesome, one of my favorite books is The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And the first agreement is don't make assumptions. Fancy that. So I love that. I love that
See?
advice. That's amazing. DJ, is there anything that you've got going on in terms of events, programs, or things that you're working on that you want people to know about?
Yeah, so obviously we have the website weeklyleadership.com. We have articles hosted on there. We have the podcast on there. One of my biggest things right now, I'm looking for individuals to become like contributing writers, because I've been connecting with so many people. I just love to get different perspectives. I like to bring in other individuals to really create a community with Weekly Leadership. So we have that going on. Right now, I'm working on a book for Weekly Leadership that's based off of those 5 principles that I mentioned earlier. So we have that in the works as well. And then, of course, we have the community itself. I just started the Facebook community. So trying to get that growing and getting more individuals involved. And I think it's a really nice way for people to come in, share their goals, share their stories, or if you're just looking to connect with other people. That's really the main thing for me, is creating a resource where individuals can come in, connect, learn, and really, learn from each other, that they can go and inspire others in their lives as well. So those are really the main things that we have going on right now. If you go to my Instagram at Weekly Leadership, the link is in the bio, and it has all of the different things, and you'll see the Weekly Leadership community for Facebook right at the top. So, but yeah.
Awesome. That is perfect. So people can follow you at Weekly Leadership on Instagram, and they can find links to everything there. I'll make sure that links to your content are in the show notes so people can check that out as well. But I cannot thank you enough, my friend, for your time today. I appreciate you so much. I always get so much out of our conversations, and it's truly a gift and a blessing for you to be in my life, and for you to give the gift that you do of just authenticity and great leadership and vulnerability, because it really does attract amazing people, and I enjoy being a part of your Clubhouse rooms. So there's a lot more to come, and I'm excited for you.
Thank you so much, Des. I appreciate you. And, again, anytime that we get to collaborate and, have these conversations, obviously, I'm very passionate about that. So, I think the platform that you have is just amazing. And you've been doing a lot of things that I've been watching that I've been like, okay, she's growing, she's growing, she's growing. And not only that, but impacting people. You impact just one person, you can inspire the world. So I think you're just doing amazing work, and I'm really, really happy to see all of it.
Thank you, DJ. Well, I'm looking forward to being able to be in person soon. I do feel it in my bones that that's coming, whether that is through the Summit of Greatness or, something else that comes up for us. I'm excited for that day, and we'll get to connect a lot more through all the different forums that we're a part of. So
For sure, for sure. Well, I'm looking forward to it, and like I said, I'm pretty sure it'll happen soon as we start to climb out of this big shift in the world. I'm pretty sure we'll get back to that for sure.
exactly, exactly. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to all of you who tuned in today to the Born Unbreakable podcast. I appreciate you. I appreciate you coming and showing up every week. I hope that you've been inspired. So stay tuned for the next episode.
Take care, guys.
It was so dope to have my boy DJ on the show, somebody who has immersed himself in leadership nearly all his life. Such an amazing story to go from somebody who couldn't read, write, or do those things well and was shy, and to see how he's thriving today. So I really took away some amazing things from the interview with DJ, but what really struck me was the importance of making time for ourselves and looking intrinsically and what those internal motivators are. Because when you have that rock solid foundation, regardless of what chaos is going on in the world, it keeps you grounded. And surrounding yourself with like-minded people is also a huge part of that. The other thing I loved that he said at the end when I asked him about the best advice he had ever been given. And he was told by his mentor, Joe Rocco, to not ever assume, to never assume. And to basically always have accountability for yourself in the way that you show up, because you never know how others are going to show up. We can only control ourselves. We can't control other people. So it's just such a blessing that there's people like DJ in the world who are out there doing that individual work to show up as a leader in the community, in the places that we serve, because we are all leaders. We all have the ability to show up and do good in the world, despite the forces that are out there telling us otherwise. Thank you so much for tuning in once again to the Born Unbreakable podcast. Remember that you are your only limit, and take action today. Can't wait for you to join me on the next episode.